when we're looking at design for something of a biological nature, like considering just the eyeball, right? Just this one organ that we have. It isn't that it just solves one problem, figuring out a way to see what's in the world and have that information be something that we can respond to. It actually solves a whole constellation of different problems simultaneously. It has to be something which is possible to grow. When you're born, you don't have an eye, and then when you basically arrive on this planet, you have a functioning organ. It had to go from a state of not being to a state of being. There needed to be some way for the organic systems to essentially emerge with this structure, this organism. It has to, in effect, be self-healing. If I get a piece of grit or I scratch it or something bumps it or I have something go wrong, that there's an automatic mechanism that it uses to essentially repair itself. How many of your cameras will repair themselves? You drop a cell phone and it cracks, it's not going to heal. It's just going to stay cracked. And in a sense, the kind of evolutionary process that has resulted in the design of this marvelous piece of technology that in a lot of ways exceeds anything that we can build today has not just optimized for one particular aspect, but is essentially solving a whole constellation of problems simultaneously. So when we're looking at civilization design, how to, in effect, recreate what we mean by the very notion of civilized, what is the essence of the problem we're actually trying to solve? It's not something that we're going to address by optimizing for any single particular function. In fact, even the notion of optimization itself is something of a problem. We don't get to the kinds of solutions that we need by optimizing for any single metric or even any finite set of metrics. We need to, in a sense, know what are the principles, what are the characteristics that a good solution needs to have. When I'm trying to make decisions, I'm not necessarily going to go through some sort of calculus equation to figure out whether or not it's a good decision. I'm going to say, does it have these characteristics? Does it, in a sense, meet the minimum necessary and sufficient criteria in order for it to actually be a solution in the space that it's supposed to be a part of? I'll give you an example. So I do a lot of product design. I have a company and we make things and we sell them to the commercial market, to the end consumers, really. And a lot of people that approach me and say, hey, I have this great idea. I want to make this thing, and I want to sell it to people, and so on and so forth. And, I look at it, and we have a conversation, and I ask a few questions. I ask, okay, so, do we have the materials? Can we source the stuff that this thing is made out of? Can we build the tools that are necessary to make this thing? Can we train the people to use the tools to make the product? Can we afford to have, can we pay people to do that? Has anybody thought about the instructions that are necessary to be read by the person that's going to use this thing? Is there an idea of how you're going to present it to the market? Do you know who the beneficiary of this work is? Do you understand all of the kinds of relationships that are going to evolve in the marketplace and how it's going to change the market? Have you accounted for what happens with the product after a person's done using it? Where does it eventually go in the environment? Does it come back to the manufacturer and you recycle it somehow or another? Does it end up in a landfill? When we look at things like pollution, there's sort of this realization that pollution happens the instant that something is made. It's not, sometime later on when it ends up in the landfill. As soon as we combine something that nature has no way of taking it apart, we've already become part of the problem. So in effect, we need to think about a much broader set of questions, a much broader set of ideas, a much broader set of issues and characteristics in order for us to essentially identify, to recognize that we are even thinking about this in an appropriate way. Are we even asking the right questions, and how would we know? So in a lot of ways, the details that we're trying to get to, the things that are essentially really important, how do we organize ourselves into communities of people that can collectively influence some of the situations that are affecting all of us? What does it mean for us to essentially align our choices as agents into a way that actually makes sense? What does that mean? When we think about the notion of civilization, in a lot of ways it comes down to a kind of conversation. Right? When I think of civilization, I think of people's capacity, their availability to talk to one another, and the level and quality of the conversations that are having. Right? It's not, our current culture has gotten very enamored with this so-called broadcast process. Here I am, giving this presentation, and in effect, I'd like to actually, rather than speaking at you, to be having a conversation with you, right? But in effect, we're we've gotten so used to this method of providing information in some sort of bulk account, and that we've in effect had this sort of method of communicating that is essentially a top-down way of thinking. And we've gotten very used to design processes that are very top-down design process. You know, we have a problem we want to solve, we figure out a way to solve that particular problem, and then we work out all the details, and then we deliver, right? It's sort of a waterfall life cycle design. What we really need at this particular point is a kind of design, a kind of conversation that rather than being from some sort of central, single, monolithic point of view, has in a sense a kind of diffused integration that has a kind of organic quality to it. We don't have the time to wait for evolution to figure this out. And given some of the powers and capacities that we have developed technologically, we in effect have entered into the responsibility of being responsible for our own evolution, being responsible for our own design. So thinking about design questions in a way that's neither top-down, which is maybe accurate but not precise enough, or bottom-up, which may be really, really precise but takes a long time. We find ourselves in a situation where we need to come up with design capabilities, design characteristics that have the rapidity of top-down, but the effectiveness of bottom-up. And so in a sense, our exercise is essentially to develop the set of tools, to develop the set of conversations, the set of intelligence-building apparatus that allows us to deal with complexity in a profoundly clear way.